Hello class, I'm Professor Satterwhite, and I will be your instructor for 19th century American literature. In this course, we'll cover the entire century and more, with a heavy focus on African American literature of this era. For this course, I'm taking the approach Nobel Prize author Toni Morrison argued in her essay, Black Matters. I'll read from Morrison's essay. This is the book. For some time now, I have been thinking about the validity or vulnerability of certain set of assumptions conventionally accepted among literary historians and critics and circulated as knowledge. This knowledge holds that traditional canonical American literature is free of, uninformed, and unshaped by the 400-year-old presence of first Africans and then African Americans in the United States. It assumes that this presence, which shaped the body politic, the Constitution, the entire history of the culture, has had no significant place or consequence in the origin and development of that culture's literature. Moreover, such knowledge assumes that the characteristics of our national literature emanate from a particular Americanness that is separate from and unaccountable to this presence. There seems to be more or less tacit agreement among literary scholars that because American literature has been clearly the preserve of white male views, genius, and power, those views, genius, and power are without relationship to and removed from the overwhelming presence of black people in the United States. The agreement is made about a population that preceded every American writer of renown and was, I have come to believe, one of the most furtively radical impinging forces on the country's literature. The contemplation of this black presence is central to any understanding of our national literature and should not be permitted to hover at the margins of the literary imagination. And again, this is from Toni Morrison's book, Playing in the Dark, Whiteness in the Literary Imagination. And I wanted to use this as a means to talk about what we're going to be doing in this class. Now, we often see American literature through a racialized lens, which, whether we think consciously or about it or not, is present often. James Fenimore Cooper's Last of the Mohicans and Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn are obvious examples, but this list is nearly as long as the American canon. Considering the sizable portion of non-Europeans in the Americas, it should come as little surprise that the footprint, shadow, and outright presence of a racialized canon is as American as apple pie. With this in mind, I thought that we could examine the 19th century American literature in a way that's rarely done, from the vantage point of the people that are usually relegated to the margins, using the language of Toni Morrison, relegated to the margins of our understanding, but in reality were major figures in the growing body of American literature. Before class begins, I want you to watch 2 episodes of the PBS series, The African Americans, episodes 2 and 3. Hosted by famed literary critic, and those words are rarely combined, famed literary critic Henry Louis Gates. These episodes will give you a foundational understanding of the history of African American history from the 1780s until the turn of the 20th century. From there, we'll follow the syllabus. Each week, I'll begin with a PowerPoint presentation, but you should also be reading the works continuously. This is a 6-week course, but I'm expected to give you the equivalent of a 16-week course in that same time period. The readings, for the most part, aren't too long, but you need to pace yourself, especially when it comes to the middle section. You'll do a lot of reading and writing in this course. So if you drink coffee, you should, and if you haven't started, you might want to think about it, because we will be doing a lot of reading. And if it's any consolation, I'm doing the readings too. So I'm not asking you to do anything that I'm also not willing to do myself. We'll start with the poetry of Phyllis Wheatley, and 2 chapters from the narrative of Olaudah Equiano, both writers of the late 18th century who died before the year 1800. I wanted to begin with them because literature and culture rarely honors the arbitrary borders we create, including those of time. Then we'll move to Frederick Douglass. We'll hear Douglass's voice throughout the class, and he'll be someone we constantly return to as we go through our readings. Douglass lived through most of the century, and we'll see history unfold through his eyes and through his writing as we look at the entire century. As for narratives, we'll also read Solomon Northup's famous 12 Years a Slave. You may have seen the movie, now you'll read the text. While the narrative is a major part of early African American literature, not just Northup's, but all of the history of slave narratives, are a large part of the history of African American literature, we'll also be reading 3 novels in the class. The first is the most famous novel of the era, Uncle Tom's Cabin, by Harriet Beecher Stowe. We'll also read Francis E.W. Harper's Iola Leroy, and finally Charles Chestnut's Marrow of Tradition. I've also recommended a modern novel. This isn't required, but it's a recommendation. It was written in the 1970s by science fiction writer Octavia Butler, and it's called Kindred. Kindred is a neo-slave narrative, and it's seen as one of the first works in the genre of Afrofuturism. While this isn't required reading again, it would be good to see how these histories and stories continue, and how modern authors use the past to create and recreate a fascinating cultural move, which can be seen in the jazz of Sun Ra to the recent film Black Panther. Before we begin the course, however, I do want to add a note of caution. The readings will be difficult for some of you. Not only as you move into the writing style of the 19th century, which is very different than our writing style today, but also the subject matter. I should give you a blanket trigger warning that the material we cover will be difficult to read at times, but the narratives are important, and I firmly believe we gain a better understanding of where we are as a people by understanding where we come from as a people. These are our roots, and we are the branches that come from this tree. If you have any questions at all, I encourage you to ask. Look for several emails from me over the next few weeks as we settle into this online environment. Until then, I want to give you a hearty welcome to 19th century American literature. Bye. We'll see you later.